Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Mindful Play Summit. I'm your host, Crystal Jensen, and today we're sitting down and having a conversation with Ali Dezenhouse. She's the clinical director of Magnificent Minds Incorporated, a private school and therapeutic provider in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Ali has a Master's of Art in Counseling Psychology, postgraduate degree in Autism and Behavioral Science, and a graduate diploma in Applied Behavioral Analysis and pursuing certification as a children's yoga teacher. She is a consultant expert in the field of childhood development, mental health, behavior, and learning therapy, the science of learning. She's a podcast host, blogger, and a mom of three. For the last decade, she has led a multidisciplinary team and supported parents in pursuing empowered parenting. She's an advocate for celebrating neurodiversity, mindfulness, and self-regulation skills for kids and their grown-ups, and accessibility within the community. Thanks so much for watching. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, we're sitting down with Ali Dezenhouse Kelner, and I'm super excited to hear what she has to say all about school-related stress and anxiety in your kids. Welcome.
Thank you. So excited.
We're super excited that you're here. Can you just take a moment and talk a little bit about yourself and what got you into the work that you're currently doing with Magnificent Minds Incorporated?
Of course. So I started my career about a decade ago, and I was inexperienced and mostly uneducated. And I was working just as a one-on-one in a childcare facility. And what kept happening was I kept getting placed with kiddos with self-regulation challenges, the kiddos who just needed, a one-on-one support to get through the day. And that kind of ignited something in me that I didn't know was there. So I thought, okay, I need to go get a little more education, a little more experience, a little more life and world experience too. So what I did was I pursued some education in the field, and I ended up doing a post-grad in behavior science, where I started looking at, the science of behavior and why we behave the way we do. And then I took coursework as well at that level in autism spectrum disorder and other neurodiversity courses and programs. And then I worked in the field as an instructor therapist, working one-on-one for several years. And then as much as I loved it, I felt, okay, what's next? I need to sort of channel this into something new. So I ended up pursuing a master's in counseling psychology, which is where I was able to take my behavior science expertise and background and kind of put it together with mental health and counseling psychology, methodologies and approaches. And what I found there was that like the midpoint of this behavior science and, mental health place that I found myself was really like the sweet spot for me, and how I could make the maximum possible, growth and change in the lives of my clients in terms of supporting them through behavior, child development, self-awareness, self-regulation, and all of these sort of good things. As I got more experience in the field, I ended up in an opportunity where the place I was working at was closing. So I was like, okay, you know what, opportunity, let's get a little entrepreneurial. And I ended up with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, starting a business initiative where we brought these two different worlds together of the behavior science and the mental health approach. And we created Magnificent Minds Inc., which has now for the last decade been an educational and therapeutic environment where, my clients, mostly kids on the autism spectrum, kids with ADHD, anxiety, a really colorful and dynamic bunch, where they're able to get their needs met in a way that is holistic. So it's not just a behavior program. It's not just a mental health or education program, but it's everything. And with all of those sort of sectors coming together and the expertise of the different professionals in each of these different areas, we've really been able to create a really nice opportunity for both our educators to learn and grow from each other, and also, of course, our clients and their parents to really learn and grow in an environment that was really created and curated for them.
I just love hearing you speak. Thank you for explaining all of that. And you can hear your passion in it. And what an opportunity to see one door close, to pivot, to bring all of it together to create something super magnificent, no pun intended, right?
Exactly.
So beautiful. So our
Thank you so
listeners
much.
are parents, teachers, educators. So when we talk about, incorporating some of this practice into our everyday, what should we look at for, making that plan and overcoming that kind of work-related stress and anxiety?
I love it. So one of the things that is often overlooked. And this is overlooked in, grown-up self-regulation, kids self-regulation, and regardless of the environment, but especially for, kids in a school environment, is, the the things that contribute to stress and anxiety and overwhelm in our kids. And one of the things that contributes to stress and anxiety and overwhelm in our kids that is often overlooked is the sensory component or the sensory variables. So we know from science and through working with kids and being parents ourselves that our body responds differently to sensory input when we are anxious or stressed or experiencing really any kind of strong emotion, right? So we might be oversensitive or undersensitive, over-responsive or under-responsive to anything in our environment. So sight, sound, smell, visual input, all of it. And this is true regardless of who you are, and you may find yourself either over or under responsive depending on just sort of your sensory profile. What this means for stress and anxiety and your ability to regulate is that input, any kind of input in the environment, sensory input, can either bring you up, so bring you towards dysregulation, or bring you down, bring you back down to center or to regulation. Understanding how our body and our brain processes everyday experiences, depending on your level of stress and anxiety, is going to give us clues about how we need to meet our needs in a way that helps us stay grounded and regulated, as opposed to riding these really big, what I call these peaks and valleys, where you're constantly ebbing and flowing between high escalation and center. You don't want to be riding these really steep waves. You want to be regulated as much as you can. So the sensory component is something that is often overlooked with, teachers and parents and kids. We are all exposed to endless variables of sensory input. So, for example, if a teacher or parent can spot these signs of escalation in their kiddo, so, signs of, slowly approaching that peak, that top of that mountain, or slowly coming back down to regulation. If they have concrete signs and cues, for example, observable behavior, they then don't have to rely on the kiddo or even themselves to self-disclose, because as we know, kids need to be taught to self-identify and to, become self-aware. Oftentimes too, as much as we don't like to admit it, grown-ups need to be taught that too. Many of us as grown-ups are not overly self-aware because many of us were not educated in this way that we're now, moving towards as, mindful educators. So what I think is really important as a starting point for assessing stress and anxiety for all of us, but in particular in a school environment, is to understand these observable symptoms or manifestations of stress and anxiety, so that we can then pivot and meet our kids where they are. So, for example, I coach a team of 20 or 30, depending on the day, staff and paraprofessionals. And one thing that I always say to them is, you can have a lesson plan, or you can have a teaching plan or a program plan in your back pocket. You come into your classroom or you come into your session with your client, and your kid is, let's say, at a level 10. They're up here, okay? And your lesson plan needs them to be down here. You can't just go right in at the level that they're not at and teach and hope that they'll come down. What that's actually going to do is bring them even probably up. They're going to stay at their peak or go even higher, right? Instead, you need to pivot. You need to meet them where they are, so that you can then guide them back down to the level that you need them at in order to educate and teach. So essentially what this means is that if we know this and we know what these observable cues look like in our students and ourselves, we can make really subtle environmental accommodations that allow our kids to be ready to learn, without asking them to come up to our level, and instead matching them at their level, and then sort of, coaching them through how we get them back down to that baseline or that ready to learn state. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And while you're speaking, I'm referencing my own experience as an educator and a parent, where the less stressed I was, I noticed the children around me was less stressed, right? And recognizing that I too have some sensory, right? If I'm in the car with my three children and the radio's going and the window's half cracked and it's whistling and there's lots going on, and to identify, my palms start to sweat, I start to get a little warm inside. And now I'm able to be the observer and say, "Oh, wait a second." I just say, "Mom needs some quiet." And I turn everything off just to be able to process. And it's like, how many years have I been operating this way with lack of awareness and having this, or sputtering over like this is my tea kettle, right? And not having that center of calm and groundedness. And now observing that shift and change, I'm now seeing it in those around me, which is a beautiful reflection piece. So I definitely am hearing what you're saying.
Totally. And one of the ways that I sort of describe this to educators, or even, to parents, and even sometimes kids, is, on a good day, or let's say a regulated day, I might be able to tolerate, or, habituate, for lack of a better way to describe it, to some form of sensory input, right? Like a chatty neighbor sitting beside me, a peer who taps their pencil or clicks their pen, or, even just sitting near the door of the classroom and then watching peers walk by. On a good day, that might be, a no-brainer, and I can easily block that out and still, focus or do what I need to do. But on a day where I'm feeling escalated or elevated, my stress levels are heightened, that those same forms of sensory input that are usually okay and I'm able to habituate to really put me on edge. They send me into a fight or flight response. Um, and if we can start to realize, that our kids are in a state that they need some very, and we're talking about very basic environmental accommodations, close the door, sit a little closer to the teacher, those kinds of things, we really are able to meet them where they are without sort of scrapping our whole lesson plan, or, scrapping our whole goal for that day. And I think the more we talk about those visual indicators, and we start to label them and acknowledge them, and then provide, choice and accommodation for our students, the more we're empowering them to do exactly what you just described, which is tune in and say, oh, I'm feeling like, let's say my palms are sweaty. Maybe that's an indicator for me that I'm feeling a little bit nervous. And if I'm feeling a little bit nervous, what are some strategies that I can do? It's not necessarily a question of, this really big gesture that I need to do to regulate. It might be something very simple. Put in headphones. I have noise blocking earplugs. These guys, they're called loops. I put them in, and they essentially are just like my AirPods, but they block the noise and there's no sound. If that's a small accommodation I can make for myself, contingent on seeing, low levels of anxiety and stress in myself, that will help me stay regulated so that I don't, need to get to a point where I reach the top of my mountain in order to come back down. Because unfortunately, for a lot of our kids, and honestly grown-ups as well, many of us don't have good coping mechanisms. And since we don't have good coping mechanisms, a maladaptive coping mechanism we use is reaching our peak, sort of flipping our lid, so to speak, and then coming back down, because we get that adrenaline rush, and that allows us to, chemically speaking, relax.
I need more of you in my life. Just like my wheels are turning and it's beautiful. My youngest is 4 and we have a drawer full of noise canceling headphones for everyone in the family. And when visitors come, there's a lot of judgment, right? And I mean, with COVID, we haven't had a lot of visitors, but even family, they're like, wow, she's really loud all the time, and socks and certain clothes and certain sensory things. And I've just had this awareness that, this is a sensory. So we give her tools to provide. We understand when she comes home from her program each and every day, she wants to sit and chew gum. She wants to sit and like ground into her seat and chew gum, where, before it's like, oh, is that a gum addiction? It's like, so, the judgment piece, the judgment of others. And what's really interesting about hearing you speak, and it fires me up, so I appreciate that, is the beautiful reflection that we're all built differently. And what I need is very different than what my 4-year-old needs, and what's my 7 or my 11-year-old needs. And to recognize those differences, and remove judgment of self as a parent, remove judgment of the child, and just recognizing that she's telling me in little ways what she actually needs. And when family comes and they observe this, they're now seeing that she knows what she needs to regulate. She knows that if she needs to go and scream in a pillow, or if she needs to sit and chew gum, or whatever it is, if she's doing what she's doing, it's all part of her own process. And so I absolutely am soaking up everything that you're speaking about. And I want to thank you for that, because for so long it was like there is that big judgment piece, right?
And so it's absolutely true. And I think the other piece that's really important too, not only is every individual in your family different, but you are different, your daughter is different, your son is different at different points of their escalation continuum. So, your daughter knowing that she needs to come home and chew some gum and, ground herself, that's fantastic. That's an amazing coping strategy, that without that, who knows what she might do to get that same level of self-regulation.
Just don't run out of gum.
Right. But that's an adaptive strategy, right? And on another day, if something else had happened at school, let's say she had like a really epically difficult day, that might not do it for her. She might need something much more intense than that, depending on, what her state is. So Yes, 100%. Everyone's different. And I myself am like a different human being at, level 1 versus that level 10. Like I don't need the same thing.
I love that. And the compassionate part, right? And then understanding of awareness as an observer or a parent or just seeing what that child needs. And like you say, a lot of the times we cope it up to, okay, well, that's a behavioral challenge, or, this child's acting out, but there's something that they're trying to tell us, right? There's something that they're trying to say. And
Yeah.
from my own experience and observing, sometimes there's these expectations that we put on that child or we put on ourselves. And to understand the science of the brain and what is developmentally appropriate and what the child's actually telling us through their behaviors, there's so much to be learned there, both for parent and child and adult and child.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think what you said about being in the car or wherever you said you were with, the noise and needing to, saying mommy needs quiet. I think that is massive because first of all, the self-awareness to know what you need is key. And then the second piece of it is that the ability to articulate boundaries in a compassionate way and a firm and consistent way to your kids is vital because we want our kids to develop healthy boundaries. If my kid needs something, I want her to know that if she draws a boundary or says, this is what I need for me, that I don't care what the judgment from the other person is, that person needs to respect your boundary. And if you need to sit there and chew gum for 20 minutes, after your day of work, you want your partner to respect that. So likewise, you want to be modeling, mommy needs what she needs right now, and you're going to have to respect that. And there isn't really any wiggle room. I'll be compassionate, I'll be gentle, but this is my firm boundary because it's what I need. And to me, that's so healthy because I have heard parents say, oh, I would feel so terrible if I said to my kid, I'm feeling touched out and I don't want any more touch right now. But if I place that boundary, then my child will be, scarred and our attachment will be, negatively impacted in our rapport and our connection. And I'm like, no, no, no. Like healthy boundaries are super important and they uphold your connection. They don't take away from it, especially if you do it in a loving and respectful and compassionate way and not in a way that is snappy. Because if you don't place that boundary, you're going to yell, you're going to get snappy. And then that's what's going to take away from your rapport and connection.
Absolutely. That resonates completely with me. So, we talked a little bit about some practical strategies, but let's talk a little bit more. What can help parents or educators prevent a buildup of a big worry or stress in school or a home environment?
Totally. So I think one of the key factors here when it comes to school and home, there is a lot of talk about, stress and worry that bubbles up over work or work tasks. And one of the major distinctions that I think we need to be making right away before we're even trying to, treat or manage anxiety or even alter our teaching style is determine whether this behavior or this anxiety or this whatever it is that we're seeing is the result of what I call a can't or a won't. So, for example, let's say you ask me to read a paragraph in a new language that I don't speak. It doesn't matter how regulated I am, how calm I am, how motivated I am. I can't read that paragraph and let's say answer reading comprehension questions about that paragraph because I don't speak the language. So I can do it if you teach me, but I'm missing skills, so I can't do it. Okay. And then let's say you were to ask me to, make a souffle. I don't want to. I probably know how. If I had a recipe, I could do it. Technically, I probably could figure out how to make a souffle, but I don't want to. In both cases, you're looking at a task that needs to be done. So reading a paragraph in a foreign language or making a souffle, a very technical, cooking thing. So I've heard, I haven't made one, but you're looking at two different situations, right? You're looking at a situation where you're likely going to get an opt-out, refusal, anxiety, a big behavior, whatever you want to call it. And you're looking at two different reasons for that. So you're looking at a situation where I can't do the reading comprehension, and you're looking at a situation where I won't make the souffle because I don't want to. And that's really important to acknowledge. So in a situation where it's a can't, it's because I don't have the skills. So, no matter what you do, whether you punish me, whether you take away my recess, whether you, give me, offer me $1 million, if you just read this paragraph and answer these comprehension questions in, some language I don't speak, I will give you $1 million. First of all, thank you for trying to motivate me. Second of all, I feel worse about myself because now not only do I not have the skills to do what you're asking me, but now there's something on the line that I can't get access to. And the reason I say this is because educators oftentimes with good intentions, parents too, try to motivate their kids. Well, if you do this, then you can get this. This is an awesome strategy, but it only works if the skills are there. And if you're dealing with, work refusal or oppositionality because it's a won't, because I don't want to, not because it's a can't. So that is super, super important. If you're dealing with any kind of work task and they can't do it because there's a skill missing, you need to teach the skill before you start worrying about, anything else like motivation or, all that other good stuff. If it's a won't, right? If I have the skills to do, say, spelling, but it's really hard, I'm getting stressed, I'm overwhelmed, it's leading to dysregulation. I've had situations in the past where I was embarrassed in class because I couldn't spell. So as a result, I won't perform that skill. That's when you tackle it very differently. So you tackle it with more of an if then, like, the if you do this, then you get your $1,000,000. Because the problem here is that I'm not motivated to perform and I need something to motivate me to, support me in putting in the hard work. It's not just about what comes after in terms of if you do this, then you get whatever, $1,000,000, recess, your favorite snack, whatever it is. That's just one component of it. But that is a really important piece to sort of isolate, because you can't, all the motivation, all the reinforcement, all the punishment in the world isn't going to help a kid who isn't performing a skill and is becoming anxious about it because they're missing, let's say, a fundamental skill. You can't do multiplication if you haven't mastered the basics that come before it. So that for a teacher and a parent is so, so vital when it comes to really extrapolating, like, what is the cause of the anxiety here? Are we dealing with a performance issue? They don't want to perform it, or are we dealing with a skill deficit or a skill issue? That resonate?
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting because sometimes we can shut down before there's even an opportunity for anything to happen. So I really appreciate that explanation. For sure, it resonates. And I've been an observer, but also recognize sometimes when it's because it's this way of teaching, or it's this way of our beliefs and how we've been parented or brought up that tries to trickle down. So it sounds like the work that you're doing and bringing this to light and this awareness piece is really shifting that foundation of future learning around that
Yeah,
awareness.
I hope so, because I think a lot of the ways that we have been taught, and I mean, I've been in the field for a decade, but I'm not that old. I'm in my 30s. I remember being in school. It wasn't that long ago, and even then, the way I was taught when I was in school, but then even just a decade ago when I was in my master's and when I was at a higher educational level where I'm being taught by professors, and you would consider it to be pretty, you almost want to say new age, like pretty woke program. And ultimately what I realized was that I was being taught by a lot of people who had been taught pedagogies that are quite stale right now. They don't take into account neurodiversity. They don't take into account, mental health and stress responses, and how we over time develop behavior patterns based on, the way these behaviors either serve us or don't serve us, from the standpoint of, emotion regulation, getting away from things that make us feel bad, like a bad teacher. If you've ever had a bad teacher and you skip that class or you avoided that lecture or whatever it is, that's exactly what we're talking about here. We're talking about the way that our emotions shape our behavior. If I felt great in that class with that teacher who was really, nurturing and championing, and really just connected with me, then I would be more likely to go to their class and try and fail than if I, had a teacher that was like, well, I just told you the answer. Focus, figure it out. And you can't because of whatever reason.
Absolutely. Well, and like you say, children learn better when they feel safe, right? Same with us adults. We learn better. We're not in fight or flight, and we're more open to receive. So I absolutely love that. So how do we teach our kids to understand and respond adaptively to their worries?
I love that. So I think there's a couple things that we need to do as parents and as educators. So, and these are sort of proactive strategies that you're going to implement hopefully before you get to the point of having a worry. And then what I'll do is talk about some strategies for working through the actual worry when it comes up. But you need both pieces, that before the worry piece and during and after the worry piece, because what happens without realizing a lot of the time is we don't address stress and worry and emotion dysregulation until we see it. So we don't do proactive teaching. And then what we know about the brain is that, when you're in a state of arousal or escalation, you're not working with, your full capacity. You're in fight or flight. So your logical brain, you're not accessing that part of your brain, and you're accessing, your emotional, your reactive part of your brain. So if we try to only teach, worry management or emotion management when we're worried or escalated, we're missing the mark. So some proactive things that I always like to lay out first for educators or parents Obviously, always ruling out medical if you are seeing big behaviors, emotion dysregulation. A lot of the time, worries and anxiety and mental health issues can manifest as somatic physical symptoms. And we want to rule that out, rule out any medical issues first. So assuming that's been done, we want to get in the habit of setting really clear behavioral expectations. So basically what that means is that kids need to know the rules of the game, and they need to be able to consistently predict what will happen if the rules are broken. So they need to know with certainty, what the expectations are for activities that they're doing. And this is not just, basketball. This is also the rules of sitting, in circle time, the rules of, being in a car, the rules of all of these situations that we do day to day, because when they know the rules, then they have a better chance of meeting the rules and then not being in a situation where they're being, reprimanded or punished for breaking a rule that they didn't know was there. When they can predict, the outcome of their actions and they know the rules, they're more calm, they're more regulated, they know how to behave in each situation. A couple of different ways you can do that, but I like the idea of making things visual for kids when we can. I like displaying schedules if we're able to do that. And I like within those schedules, using the schedule as an opportunity to come back to and anchor into those rules. So, the first thing we're going to do today is, circle time. The rules of circle time are, and, you bring them in a conversation so that they know, the rules of circle time or whatever it is that you're doing. While you're doing that and you're outlining those rules, I really like the idea of using if-then contingencies. So this is the part where you're bringing in the certainty around what will happen if rules are met and also if rules are broken. So if you don't raise your hand, when you want to contribute something or you want to say something or get my attention, then, I will do this and this will be a cue for you to raise your hand or whatever it is. So you're giving them these frameworks from the beginning so that they know what to expect. And you're also consistently referencing and prompting these rules and expectations. So that means, you're reinforcing it and you're saying how great it is when you see it, and you're not just waiting for it to be broken. That rule, oh, you didn't raise your hand. You're not just calling out, those times that the rules were broken, but you're also referencing those times that they met those rules so that we're ensuring that our feedback is balanced. Ultimately, our kids are still learning these rules. And while we as grown-ups may think, they're intuitive, of course you have to, I don't know, say my name if you want to talk to me. For a kid, it may not be quite as intuitive. The next thing that I think is super important is when you see a big behavior, a worry, a moment of dysregulation, you want to label it. Of course, oh, you're feeling mad, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling tired. But you don't want to wait until you see it to label it. You want to practice labeling and naming emotions and feelings, complex ones like, something like overwhelmed, and then also basic ones like angry, happy, excited, complicated ones like anxious or stressed, and those basic ones like, I don't know, happy. So you're making sure that you're not, again, in a situation where you're just referencing emotions contingent on seeing the ones you don't like, because we know already that whatever we attend to, we see more of. So the second we start only attending to negative or objectively negative emotions, the big ones, then we're going to start to see more of that as well. The idea here is that you are actively teaching self-awareness and resilience, and you are not just passively teaching it. So you are not just telling a kid, to calm down when they need to calm down or take a deep breath when they need to take a deep breath. Instead, you're actually teaching them the rules of deep breathing, what it looks like, how you do it, when you do it. A couple other things that I think are really important, and feel free to jump in at any time if you have any questions, but I think something that often gets overlooked is, what we were talking about earlier with respect to the feelings that you have. And I don't mean the emotions, I mean like the physical somatic feelings, sensations that you have relative to each emotion. So where do you feel your happiness in your body? Where do you feel your anger or your worry in your body? And I think this is really important because it adds another layer to, labeling your emotions is fantastic. Being able to say, show me a happy face, a sad face, that's all fantastic and very basic and an important starting point. But to get to that next level where we're developing self-awareness, we have to teach them that introspection. What does it feel like internally for me? The interesting part with this is that happiness doesn't feel the same for everyone on the inside. So we really have to engage in dialogue with them that's collaborative and let them know, these are all the things that could be indicators of happy or of sad or of mad, what resonates with you, and really bring them into that conversation. When you're doing this, you're giving them a way to take something abstract and bring it into something more concrete for them so that, let's say their palms start getting sweaty, they will realize and make connections that my palms can feel sweaty both, when I'm exercising, when I'm sitting under the sun, and, when I'm feeling worried, because all of these are important pieces of the puzzle for them to connect and really develop that self-awareness to be able to choose a coping strategy or choose a strategy that's going to keep them regulated. Obviously, if your palms are sweaty because you're sitting in the sun, a really good coping strategy would be moving into the shade. But if your palms are sweaty because you're exercising, you might not need to do anything about that. That might just be okay. Does that make sense?
Love it. And I love the conversational piece, right? Because that's where the magic happens. It's easy for us to say, like you say, this is happy, this is sad, but the
Yeah,
where it feels in the body is, I think I learned that in my 30s. Or how to
totally.
intentionally breathe, right? It's like,
Totally. No, I know. It's so funny because when I'm in the process of doing a children's yoga and mindfulness certification. And one of the things that we were talking about in it is that, like we don't take a deep breath until we're annoyed. Like we don't take a deep breath until we're sighing and we're like, ah. And that's actually your body's physical way of regulating, because your body is like, hey, you're not regulating. Let me go ahead and get in the driver's seat and take a deep breath. But the idea is that we need to be doing that before we get to that point of being frustrated and overwhelmed. And I think, we say to kids, take a deep breath, and they're like, I breathe all day, but they don't
doesn't work.
understand,
Yeah.
right? It
Totally.
doesn't, exactly. It's not the same. A couple other things that I think are really important come down to sort of more cognitive components of, managing anxiety. So, growth mindset, if you work in a school, is something that we talk about a lot, taking it, I can't to I will, and really reframing those perspectives. And I think the thing that is often missed and sort of applied incorrectly, from my opinion, on all of this is that educators and parents will say, they'll say, I can't. The kid will say, I can't. And you'll say, no, say, I'll be able to soon. And you're getting them to repeat and echo. And I think instead of that, I think what I prefer is for a parent to just model that reframe and not expect the kid to repeat it back. Because I think when we do that, it kind of loses its magic. And I think if we keep modeling these reframes, our kids are going to pick up on it. And then when they spontaneously, issue a reframe of their own, belief, that's when you want to go in and reinforce it and like really throw a party. Oh my gosh, I can't believe how flexible and resilient and positive you're being. As opposed to, them saying something like, this is hard, I'll never be able to do it. And you saying, no, reframe your perspective. How can you reframe it? And coaching them to do it. Because I think sometimes when you do that, it's almost perceived as punitive. And they're clearly indicating in that moment that they're already escalated. If they're going to this place of, I'll never be able to do this, they're saying like, I'm reaching my max here. So let's not then impose another demand that, makes them respond or repeat or whatever it is. But having said that, it is really important to model that. And when you're doing something that's difficult, model that reframe for them. Oh, this batter's taking so long to mix, but I know if I keep trying, I'll do it, or whatever it is, so that they're getting exposed to that reframe and that growth mindset consistently. The other thing that's really important when it comes to the cognitive piece is talking about what I like to call the tricky brain. So this is the poem that I provided for you, for everyone who's watching. And essentially the gist of it is that we want to teach our kids that it's okay to be detective when it comes to, thinking about their thoughts, the size of their problem, the size of their worry, and the scope of their reaction. So what we say to our kids is that sometimes our body will react to a small problem in a way that makes it feel much bigger than it is. Your brain, sends you into fight or flight as we know it as grown-ups. And what that causes us to do is have a really big catastrophic reaction. And for kids to know that just because I think something, for grown-ups too, but especially for kids, just because I think something doesn't mean that it's true, or just, because in this moment this feels so heavy and all consuming doesn't mean that it is. And with a bit of perspective and distance, this won't feel so overwhelming. So this tricky brain poem is really just a way of, a fun rhyming way to talk to your kids about being able to say, brain, I know you're awesome and I know you're really smart and you help me do lots of things, but I also know you can be a little tricky sometimes. So, not today, tricky brain. And it really just gives them a bit of a script for, putting their thoughts on trial, as we would call it, sort of in the CBT, cognitive behavior therapy world.
I love that. And I'm like, we gotta hear this poem.
I know, I don't think I have it in front of me, but you have it to share with them.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, so I think the other, a couple other things that are really important for just responding to worry and fear. Of course, we always want to validate and empathize with our kiddos when they're having worries and fears, but it's also really important to remember, what I had said before, which is that what we focus on, we see more of. So yes, of course, acknowledge and validate and empathize, but also, let your kids know that we're not going to ruminate. We're not going to, we're not going to get stuck. We're going to demonstrate flexibility, right? We're going to be able to shift and think about different things. We're going to give our thoughts and worries the attention they need and sit in our feelings as much as we need to, but we're not going to be consumed by it all the time. And one of the ways we can do that as the grown-ups that are coaching our kids and co-regulating with our kids is by letting them talk about something and then letting them know that it's okay to, the analogy I use is close the door. So it's okay to close the door. We're not going to throw away this worry or this thought, but we're just going to put it in the cupboard and close the door. And we can come back to it anytime you want to talk about it more. But I feel like we've really talked about it a lot, and you feel like we've talked about it a lot. Let's close the door and see if a little distance makes us feel better. And that analogy of closing the door, or sometimes I'll say putting it in a bucket and closing the bucket lid, or whatever it is, depending on, the age of your kiddo, can be really powerful for them because it lets them know that it's okay to step away from a worry, and that doing that doesn't mean that they're completely letting go, because sometimes that can be a little scary too. Well, if I forget that I'm scared of bees and I close the door, then, next time I see a bee, I might forget, and then it might sting me, and that can be scary for them. So they know we can always return to it, but that in this moment we've given it everything we need to right now.
So powerful. I love that
Does that make
analogy,
sense?
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's interesting because it's not going away forever. It's just being put into that safe place for another time.
it's a lot of therapists will say to grown-ups, schedule time to worry. So schedule yourself 5 to 10 minutes to worry in the morning from 9 to 9:05 or whatever works for you, and then close the door on your worry. Like you've scheduled it. You're going to come back to your worries tomorrow, but next time your worries come into your brain, let them float out, because you've already gone there. You don't need to put yourself through it so many times. That's just another sort of way to think about that. I think with parenting, we want to attend to the behaviors of our kids that, seem to us to call for connection and need, to hold space and all of that. And of course, that's really important. But we also need to realize that the more we talk about something, the more it stays, in our thoughts and in our, belief system. So giving the permission and the permission to distance from that is so powerful. And it also gives parents and educators that knowledge to say, we've talked about this, we've given this our attention, and now we're going to put it away and close the door, without feeling like they are minimizing, because they're not. They know they've given it full attention. They know they've shown up in a way that their kid needs or their student needs, but they've done it in a way that is placing boundaries that are healthy and that are going to ultimately benefit the kid, and of course the teaching and learning environment too.
Wow. So many nuggets, my friend. There's lots of
Thank you.
beautiful information. I could just sit and listen to you talk all day. If there was just one, more piece of advice that you wanted to give our listeners today to sum it all up in a bow, what would that look like?
One more piece. I think one of the most important things to know about anxious and sensitive kiddos is that they're hyper aware of their environment. They're feelers, right? They can be empathetic. They can be so kind, compassionate, and oftentimes detail oriented, because they're picking up on things in the environment that others are not picking up on. And these are amazing qualities. These are qualities that many of us strive to have. So I think looking at, the good that comes from this kind of profile or this kind of experience and emotion is really important, so that we're not constantly trying to stop a fear, stop a worry, stop a big emotion, and that we're really letting our kids know that all of their feelings, all of their emotions are totally valid and frankly normal part of the lived experience. And it's only through experiencing that full spectrum of emotions that we get to have relative enjoyment. Happiness wouldn't feel quite as happy if we didn't also have sadness. And I think all of that full perspective is something that is really hard for kids to see, and sometimes for grown-ups too. So if we can paint that picture for them and really reinforce and validate that all of their feelings and worries and stresses are all okay, I think that that also takes some of the additional layers of stress out of it, because it's not just the stressful, it's not just the stressor, the worry, the fear, it's also, the aftermath that can sometimes bring shame and guilt and all of these other more complicated feelings that hopefully we can just take out of the equation.
I love all of that. Allie, it's been such a pleasure connecting with you. We have all of your speaker links below here on your speaker page so our listeners can find you. And I just wanted to share my deepest gratitude for your time and for connection. It's been definitely very enjoyable. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been so nice.
All right. Everybody, thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye-bye.